Ooh. Hello everybody and welcome back to Teacups and Toadstools. I'm really excited to be making this video today because it means I get to talk about more books that I like, and I get to talk about how I read more books that I liked this month, and I'm really excited to share all I got with you. Today I have a Buffy the Vampire Slayer mug because you know what? 2 videos in a row, we needed a Buffy mug. I love Buffy, and I love that this one has like this little knife on the handle. Like it's a nice touch. My roommate from last year gave it to me as a gift, so Allie, if you're watching, thanks for this mug. Awesome. So in this video today, I'm filming in a slightly different spot because I just wanted to experiment what it might be like to sit on my bed. We'll see. We're playing with some different backdrop situations, so enjoy these lovely swirlies. And yeah, so I'm gonna share with you guys how I managed to read 10 books as a full-time student in the month of February, which is the shortest month of the year. And I kind of found ways to integrate reading into my daily routine, which I'm excited to share with you. Some tips on how to do that a little bit more and tell you about the books that I read. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so the first book that I read, or I guess finished, I didn't start it this month, but I read about more than half of it this month, so I'm gonna count it that I read it this month, is Little Women, and I was really excited to kind of get to finish this book and view it from the perspective of an older person rather than being little and reading it. And I definitely think I recommend doing that for anybody who read that book when they were younger but haven't touched it since, because it resonated with me differently than it did when I was younger, obviously because I'm older, but I think it still had a lot to say for me, and it inspired me to delve into my creativity a little bit more, and I just really enjoyed that story and getting to get introduced to the characters again and getting to read it alongside watching the new movie. It was just very interesting, and I obviously loved it. I gave it 5 stars because it was really great. Yeah, oh, also, I have a Goodreads. Link is below if you want to follow me on Goodreads and follow me in my reading journey. Alright, the second book that I read this month was a book I read for my sociology class for school, and it's called, ooh, excuse me, I just burped. The book is called The Pursuit of Attention, Power of Ego in Everyday Life, I believe? Power and Ego in Everyday Life. I got my list here because I can't keep track of all this. And that's by Charles Derber, and it's a short read. I think it was only like 100 pages, and it was about sirens, apparently. This book analyzes how people have discussions in informal settings and in formal settings and what kinds of roles people take in conversation. It was definitely very interesting. I don't think I agreed with everything he said, and the book is a bit dated. It was written in the 1970s, and so some of his discussion about gender and the very poignant absence of any discussion about race is very present in this book. And so I don't think, if you're looking for like a sociology fun read, wouldn't be the one I would recommend for you, but it definitely was interesting if you want to get a different opinion and maybe delve into this topic a little bit more. Check it out. Alright, so in the spirit of being inspired of rereading books that I loved when I was younger, I actually reread Anne of Green Gables this month because we had an assignment for the show that I'm in this semester to bring in a childhood memory or something, an object that was very important to your coming of age, and Anne of Green Gables is mine. And so I hadn't reread it in I think like 3 years, and so I wanted to reread it again, and it was amazing. If you are an adult and you haven't read this novel, it is not too late. You will absolutely love it. It's beautiful, and I'm loaning my copy to a friend that I had this conversation with, so definitely check it out. It's about, if you haven't heard anything about it, it's about an orphan named Anne who gets adopted by 2 siblings who live together, and she grows up in this beautiful place called Prince Edward Island, and it's just about her background being an orphan and how that affects how she acts and who she becomes, and it's a lovely story, and it's a beautiful read. The next book I read this month was Nevermore #1, The Trials of Morrigan Crow, because I was on a middle grade fiction kick apparently, and guys, this book is a mix between the Mysterious Benedict Society and like Harry Potter and just Percy Jackson. It is so good, and it was so unique, and I really loved the ideas in it, and it was a fun read, and I just needed a light read, and it gave it to me, and I'm really excited to read the second book of the series. It'll be really fun, so definitely recommend. Any age, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. Alright, so next is another book for class, because I am currently in a Shakespeare class where we're doing Shakespearean scenes, and so I read the play Henry VI because I was doing a monologue from it for my class, and I thought it was fine. It was okay. Yeah, it features Joan of Arc, which is kind of neat to see Shakespeare's interpretation of this historical figure, and I enjoyed like her scenes, but everything else fell a little flat for me, but it was interesting to read it and kind of see and think about how would they act out these scenes that are basically just battle scenes, but just on stage in Shakespearean times. I just thought it was really interesting to think about that. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend. Reading Shakespeare like on the page is always very difficult for me. I like to see it on stage because that's how it's supposed to be done. You're supposed to watch it and not read it. So, you know, if you enjoy reading Shakespeare, check it out. And if you think the story might interest you, definitely check it out. But I'm always a fan of watching the plays more than actually reading the plays. So then I kind of went through a little bit of a poetry kick because I haven't read a lot of poetry ever, and I kind of just assumed that I don't like it without really giving it a shot. And so I had a friend of mine loan me a couple books, which I will now list. But the first one was Antigonic, and it is it's an adaptation of Antigone by Anne Carson. And this book incorporates text in a handwritten style and art overlapping the text and like playing around with like what words can be seen and not seen when art is overlapped over them. Very interesting, and I definitely enjoyed it, and I hadn't read Antigone in a very long time, and so it was kind of nice to see this interpretation of it. It was a beautiful book to look at, and it was just a really fun read, and so, you know, if you're into that kind of thing, check it out. Alright, so then I read The Ghost of by Diana Coy Nguyen, I believe is how you pronounce her name, and this is a book of poetry that is autobiographical, and it surrounds her and her family and coping with her brother's suicide. It was very, very well written and a very unique concept and layout, and it was just heartbreaking, but in all the best ways, and I really enjoyed it. Definitely a book of poetry I would recommend if you're trying to get into it a little bit more, because it's grounded in something that's so real for the author. It's very easy to understand what all the words mean, and it's easily graspable, and I really enjoyed it, so definitely would recommend that. Alright, then next I read The Dutch House by Ann Patchett. I had never read anything by Ann Patchett before, and I was curious at how she wrote because we read a article by her in one of my creative writing classes, and I was like, I've seen her name when I worked at a bookstore. I would see her everywhere because she's a popular author, but I had just never read any of her stuff. And I will say this book at least did not disappoint. It was a book that I read at the right time in my life, and it's about, okay, so it follows a boy who, growing up, and from when he was 8 until he's like in his 50s, and it surrounds the house, and the Dutch house is like its own character, and it's a really neat character-driven story. It's definitely got some big plot points, but if you're more into character pieces, this is definitely one to check out. Really loved it. I gave it 5 stars. It was great. Alright, so then I read Headwaters, which is a book of poetry that's by Helen Bryant Voigt, I believe. Voigt? I don't know how to pronounce her last name, but this book of poetry was enjoyable. It was a little bit more abstract than the other things that I read, which was definitely interesting, but it was a little bit harder. You had to take your time with it because it was a little harder to kind of wrap your head around everything, and sometimes I had to read a couple of the poems a couple of times just to kind of see how they resonated with me, but very enjoyable. I really loved, specifically there was a poem called Fox that I really liked from that piece, so really, really good. The last book I read this month is a book by John McWhorter. Alright, so the last book I read this month is a book by John McWhorter, and he is a very controversial study of linguistics because a lot of his opinions people disagree with. And so we read a book by him in our sociology class to kind of see different perspectives of language, and this book that we read is called Talking Back, Talking Black. And basically his argument in this book is about how Black English is not a dialect, it's actually its own form of the English language that we need to respect more because it has its own rules, and it's a language that's spoken by a lot of people in our country. And I definitely really enjoyed the book. It was very easy to read, and I really loved a lot of the points that he made because I think they were ones that I hadn't really heard before, and it's always neat to get a different perspective on ideas. Alright, so let's talk about how I did this. How did I read all of these books in 1 month as a full-time student, also doing rehearsals for a show on the weekends? I know this is crazy. So I took the initiative to make mornings my time that is just mine and to read in the morning, because I'm always more alert in the mornings, and so I was able to devote that time specifically to reading. And so I set aside 30 minutes every morning where I would read, because you just kind of got to make time for it. I'm not a crazy speed reader. I don't know how to like read super fast, but I know that I love to read and I do like to take my time with it. And so setting aside 30 minutes of reading in the morning was a really easy way for me to read more this month, and actually reading before bed. So I chose to replace watching YouTube videos before bed with reading. Oh, my mom's calling me. 1 second. Hi! Alright, we're back. Sorry about that. So, what was I talking about? Oh no. Oh yeah, setting aside time in the morning. Oh yes, okay, so I remember. So another part of that was I was replacing YouTube with reading, because I watch a lot of YouTube before I go to sleep, and that's like a bad habit to be in because you don't sleep as well when you're like watching YouTube videos right before you go to sleep. And so I was like, okay, for my own like sleeping health, let me read before bed instead of doing this. And so that was another way that I was able to read as much as I did. And it also helped that a lot of these were assigned books. This month I read 3 books that were in my curriculum already, and some of them were shorter. I think another thing I found was balancing a longer book with a shorter book, like reading both at the same time. That way, you know, as I'm trucking through a thicker book, I have a shorter book to kind of like, you know, be a palate cleanser if I need a break from the longer book. And reading both at once, actually I found to be a little bit easier for me. And the classic tip that every reader will tell you is always carry a book with you, because you never know when you're gonna be like waiting. I ended up waiting at the doctor's office last week for like 2 hours, and I had a book with me and I read like 100 pages while I was waiting because I had nothing else to do. And so there are times like that that you might wish you had a book on you, so that way you had something to read and you could progress your reading a little bit more. So that's a big piece of advice that I will definitely be like the other person to tell you, like, carry a book with you at all times. You might only get 2 pages read, but that's something, and you'll enjoy the time you're spending reading. So alright, so I hope you enjoyed this video today, and I hope that you get some fun book recommendations from this video, and I'm really excited to see what I get to read this month with implementing this new technique, I guess, into my life. So alright, but yeah, subscribe to my channel. I'm really excited. I've had a little bit of a growing audience recently. I've had some new subscribers. Nancy Drew videos are coming, my friends. I promise they are coming, and I will see you soon. Bye.